So I'm Kane, host of the VUXWorld podcast. Any listeners of the podcast here? Yeah? Oh, wicked. Yeah, that's wicked, that. Cool. For those that haven't, this is kind of the visual it. You can find it on most of your podcasting places or at VUX.world. We kind of spend our time speaking to developers, designers, strategists, practitioners, all kinds of people from the world of voice, AI, and conversational kind of design in general. And we kind of try and do three things really. It's kind of a practical kind of podcast, so we try and have conversations that will help you implement the same kind of stuff in your work. And we focus on three kind of main areas. One is design, the other is strategy, and the other is development. So we want to try and help you build the right thing, something that's going to add value to your business and to your user, design it in the right way so that it's a decent user experience, and also implement it as well. So that's kind of what we do. And I kind of wanted to speak a little bit about I thought that was air coming out of that there. I thought I'd added some sound effects to it, that would have been cool. Iteration number 1 for this deck. So I thought I'd just kind of speak a little bit about what we've been noticing over the course of doing the podcast and speaking to so many people. We've spoke to probably, I don't know, you haven't been on it yet, Tom, but we do have to sort this out at some point. We've spoke to, I don't know, 70, 80 people, something like that, over the last sort of 16 months or so. So we've kind of really seen the voice assistant kind of ecosystem and industry really kind of grow over the last sort of 16 months. So this is just a few kind of observations of what we've noticed and where we think things are at now, and also maybe a little bit about where we might see it going. So this wonderful child is, I was going to say it's representative of my kid. He's about 10 months old, he's looking like that now. He's got little goofy teeth coming through and he wants to play with everything. So, it's kind of representative of where things tend to start when a new technology is introduced. So if you think back to when the iPhone was introduced, 2007 or something like that, most of the apps when the App Store was released were kind of just playful, like, novelty apps, you know. They were like, you remember the one where it's like your whole phone fills up with a pint and you just kind of tip it and the pint empties on your phone screen? Classic stuff. Novelty stuff, playing around with the concept, playing around with the fact that we now have a screen and we can do things with it. And that's kind of what's been happening in voice quite often, is that people are kind of playing around, and a lot of hobbyists that start to build their first skills will create something like the legendary fart skill, where you can just ask Alexa to play a fart and it will just fart for you. You know, in fact, you can actually just ask it that now and it will just do it. Or things like cat facts. Tell me a random fact about a random cat, and it's just kind of a database full of a load of random facts, and it will just keep reading them and reading them and reading them until you either fall asleep or tell it to stop. So that's kind of where things were at. Not completely, but it's what a large proportion of the skills were in the skills store probably about 16 months ago when we started the podcast. A lot of kind of hobbyists and a lot of, like, not necessarily delightful experiences. So what we've seen, and certainly this year, we've started to see people create more value, genuine value, not just little novelty kind of like 30-second interactions, but things that will entertain, bring value, and also kind of allow people to do stuff. And congratulations on the Webby, by the way. And that is an example, though, of how far things have come and how people are using these kind of smart speakers for entertainment, to kill time or to entertain themselves, to be educated, and also to get stuff done. So we're moving away from the kind of fart skills, and we're moving more into doing stuff with purpose, which I think is a decent sign of how it's matured. It's also grown quite a lot. Like, when we first started the podcast, it was February last year, and I think I listened back on the 1 year anniversary. I listened back to the first episode of VUXWorld just to see what we were talking about, and I think we said something like smart speakers are at like 20 million, like adoption-wise, 20 million. Now it's like, I don't even know where it's at now. In fact, 100 million playing. Oh yeah. I think America is like over 50 million itself. I think in it, something like that. It's like 25% of America. So it's grown pretty substantially. And what's interesting about how it's grown is this was done relatively recently by VoiceBot. Is everyone aware of VoiceBot? Yeah, a few people. If you're not aware of VoiceBot and you're even half interested in the kind of voice industry and the voice market, check out VoiceBot. Brett Kinsella, he's got a decent podcast and he publishes articles. I don't know if he does anything else other than just sit up writing articles constantly. He's at every single event you could possibly go to. But they publish a load of industry data and studies. It's really interesting. This is one of the recent ones. This is purely based in America. Who owns smart speakers? So we've seen it grow, over 100 million smart speakers specifically. That's not counting voice assistants on mobile devices, that's just purely smart speakers. And 18 to 29-year-olds own most of them, relatively speaking. But this is quite interesting. Over 60s, 20% of the voice assistant market in America is by the over 60s. And what's also not involved here is kids. So what voice has done and the growth of voice, and the reason why I think it will continue growing at that kind of pace, is that with mobile, most people, first of all, you need to have a phone. You need to know how to work the phone. That rules my nana out completely. And also for kids, loads of people don't really want to give the kids phones. So that's exactly where I'm at now, debating whether or not, what age do I give my kid a phone? You know what I mean? And my wife will sometimes give him hers just to play with if he's in bed or something like that. And it's like, do we want to be doing that or do we not? When do we give him a phone? So it's like trying to not get them into the kind of mental state of having this screen next to them all the time and having these notifications popping up and all that kind of stuff. But what voice does is it gives people some time away from screens, which is what parents really like about it. So when we're talking about voice, you've got kids that can not even read yet, can still use smart speakers, and adults up until the day you die can use it as well. So the scope of the market and the potential market is absolutely huge. So what that means is that when you create something for a voice assistant, you can be fairly targeted. I mean, that use case we've just seen there, extremely targeted. That's where the value is. You don't want a generic thing for generic people. You want to solve someone's problem. And the amount of problems that need solving and the amount of use cases that you'll find when you start digging around are absolutely vast. And half of that is because of the scope of users. I thought that was Ron Burgundy, but I think it's actually Will Ferrell doing an impression of George W. I think. But what we've also seen is probably, again, when we launched the podcast, it was very much about tactical experimentation. So it was kind of like a lot of in terms of what brands were doing. Brands were trying a lot of kind of like tactical experimentations. So, for example, let's take Domino's. So Domino's have a skill. Has anyone used a Domino's skill? To order a pizza? No? Good luck if you have, because it's an absolute nightmare. So essentially with the Domino's skill, you have to, you start the experience and then you have to link your account. So you need to get your phone out, you leave the voice assistant, get your phone out, visit this URL, sign in, and then what you've got to do is you've got to add everything you want to order to this favourites box on the website. And then once you've created your favourites box and saved it, then you can go back to Alexa and order your favourites box with your voice. By the time you've ordered your favourite box, you're one tap away from checking out on the phone. So that was an example really of a bit of a tactical experimentation from Domino's. What would it be like if we had an Alexa skill? Can we just slap it all over our marketing as a bit of a tactic to try and see if it'll make a difference? But what we're seeing now is people are starting to, it's still experimenting, no one's got it boxed off, but most of the experimentation is becoming more strategic. It's becoming more around trying to move the needle. So for example, there's an agency in America called Rain Agency, fantastic agency. The people that run it are absolutely amazing. And they've been working with a whole host of brands from DreamWorks and Unilever. The one they did with Unilever was they got a load of influencers, which is the term of the day to use, a whole load of Unilever's influencers, and they did a 7-week pilot as an experimentation to see whether or not if they could use Alexa to increase engagement amongst the Unilever's target market by using Unilever's influencers to kind of, what they were doing essentially, they were giving daily beauty tips. Every single morning, you'd go to Alexa, you'd ask it for a new tip, and your influencer who you knew would come on, give you a tip, guide you through something, and the sign-up rate to that newsletter, just based on the people who were interacting on Alexa, the amount of people that signed up to the newsletter from that skill was 10%. They've been really cagey about numbers, and it was only a pilot, but it's driving engagement and it's increasing the number of subscriptions on the newsletter. So there's a lot of experimentation going on. There's a lot of stuff around. So an agency called Say It Now, who very kindly invited me on their team for the Alexa Cup, which they won the UK round of a few weeks back, which is extremely exciting. So the semi-final is tomorrow, And if they win that, then they go to America to face off against the Americans at the Voice Summit, and whoever wins that is crowned the Alexa Cup champion. So there you go. So Say It Now, the agency I've been doing this with, they created a skill for Talisker. Did anyone drink Talisker or heard of Talisker, the whiskey? Yeah, fantastic, yeah, absolutely wicked. Well, you love this. Have you got a smart speaker? Have you got like a Echo? Have you got like an Echo or something? Three, fantastic. Well, you can both use it at the same time then. So what they've done, they've created a skill for Talisker, and the idea is that it augments the product experience once you bought the whiskey. So you get the whiskey home, and then what it'll do is it will provide you with a tasting experience. So you can sit with the whiskey, it'll talk you through it, it'll tell you how it was created, it'll teach you how to taste it, and the actual voice of that is one of the people who actually make it, which is fantastic. So what they've done is they've put the logo, works with Alexa or Ask Alexa or whatever, on the bottle, and they're doing an experiment now to see whether that increases whiskey sales. So people aren't necessarily just playing with it anymore, they're really trying to experiment to see whether or not they can do things that move the needle in terms of what drives their business. And what that means then is most people or brands typically will start off thinking of a smart speaker or Alexa or Google Assistant, and you'll think about it in the context of it being a platform, and it is really, it's a platform that you can build on top of. You can build skills on the Alexa platform, you can build actions on the Google platform, but when you treat it solely as a platform, you tend to have to create content specifically for that platform, which is good because there's a lot of very good games, there's a lot of interesting skills out there that will really engage people. The Kung Fu Panda one is fantastic. We have that on all the time with Artie. So you can think about it as a standalone platform. What we're also seeing is people thinking of it as a kind of a bridge between their current systems that they have and the end user. So for example, Virgin Trains is a pretty good one. So Virgin Trains, you can buy a train ticket on Alexa. And what they do is they use Alexa as the front end, as a way of reaching people in their homes, as a way of extending their service through smart speakers. But what they do is they'll integrate that with their ticketing system so that when they make a sale, it's all integrated with their line of business systems. So another way of thinking about it is using these platforms as an extension of what you already do, as an extension of your system, your current infrastructure. The last way to think about it, which is, I kind of see it as a little bit of as kind of like a stepping stone. So you might start out here building a fart skill. Anyone created a fart skill recently? Yeah, classic. See, it's where you start. So you think about it in this context, and then you'll probably move to this environment because you'll be thinking, well, this really works. It's really interesting. I really like the way users are engaging and interacting with it. I've learned a hell of a lot about conversational interfaces. But what if it was able to drive our business forward? And then you start getting into this kind of realm. Then what you'll realise is actually voice extends far beyond smart speakers into all of this and even more. The new LG TV ship with Alexa, you've got the multimodal devices and screen-based devices. You have the smart speakers, obviously, phones, Android, over 1 billion phones in circulation. So Google Assistant is on over 1 billion devices. So their install base is 1 billion, which is like, what, I don't know, more than 10% of the population, isn't it, of the global population. And then you've got wearables and watches and cars and anything that can house a chip, a microphone, and a speaker potentially could have a voice interface. So this is where you end up, is starting to think about voice as an interface to your business across all of your possible existing channels and customer touchpoints, as well as it might create new ones, such as if you've got a retail store, you might have a voice assistant guiding people around, showing where things are. So that's kind of the evolution. We've also seen design improve quite a lot. So, you were speaking earlier on around the kind of tree-based design and the tree-based narrative, which most people will start out that way when it comes to voice, but with a conversation, anyone can say anything at any time. So you need to kind of be prepared for any eventuality. So the Virgin Train skill, as nice as it is, as good as it is, it actually takes the online booking time of a train ticket down from 7 minutes online to 2 minutes via voice. So it is impressive stuff. However, they have created it in a way that uses that tree-based structure. So what that means is you can get a choice at the beginning, you can check train times, or you can book a ticket. If you try and check a train time, you'll tell it what station you want to leave from, what station you want to arrive at, and all that kind of stuff, and it'll give you a time. It'll say London to Edinburgh on Wednesday was one leaving at 5:10. If you say book it, it'll freak out, doesn't know what to do. You have to go back up to the very beginning to then start down the booking path to then book it. And weirdly, I tested this in the workshop recently, and when you do that, you'll get different train times. So I don't quite know how they've done it. But that's symptomatic of, if you imagine this screen split in two, and at the top you decide to go down the check-in time path, and down here you decide to go down the booking path, there is no link between these two paths. So there's something which Paul Cutsinger, I think, has originated at Amazon. He's one of the Alexa evangelists at Amazon, and he's originated this thing called situational design, which is kind of the ability to let anybody do anything from anywhere in the skill. So that's kind of where things are moving. Design's kind of moving forward. We had Mark Webster on the podcast recently from Adobe. He founded a company called SafeSpring that was acquired by Adobe. It was one of the first kind of real purchases and acquisitions of a relatively big company acquiring a voice startup. So SafeSpring's now being weaved into the XD product. Does anyone use XD for design and stuff like that? Adobe XD? Yeah. So SafeSpring's inside there now, so you can create voice prototypes. We had him on a podcast, and one of the things that he was pointing out is we might be approaching things with a bit of a wrong kind of paradigm. So most of the time, when people create a skill, they'll start with something like, welcome to Kane's fantastic skill. But most of the users who get to that skill have said, Alexa, open Kane's fantastic skill. So they know where they are, they know what they're going to get to. So there's a few little things like this and a few little kind of nuances that we're starting to kind of uncover. And discoverability is obviously another challenge as well, it's another design challenge. You need to know that Kane has a fantastic skill to ask Alexa for Kane's fantastic skill. If you know that Kane's fantastic skill will play you Kane's fantastic podcast, then you need to be able to be aware of that before you can actually get to it. So there's a few discoverability challenges that we need to overcome. But more often than not, design has advanced quite a bit. So this is an example of some of the things that are being designed. So I showed you that scale from platform to interface. This is another kind of example of the kind of skills, specifically looking at smart speakers and Alexa, the kind of stuff that is being designed. It might give you a little bit of inspiration if you think about kind of creating some of this stuff. So on the one hand, you've got pure audio. This is long form audio. You tell something to play and it will just play. BBC are doing fantastically. If you ask for BBC Radio 1 to play on Alexa, it'll just play BBC Radio 1. You can listen to it for as long as you like. Podcast is another one. They've got an example. Then you've got the kind of interactive audio element. I think games are probably fit in here as well. So it's still audio, it's an audio experience where you can interact with it. So you've got long form interactive audio like Hidden Cities Berlin, which is action on Google Assistant. It's an interactive long form documentary. It takes you around Berlin, you meet the local people of Berlin, you find out about Berlin and what's going on with it. It's really interesting, it's really good. Then you've got the kind of like the short form interactive audio, which is the games and the deal or no deals and all that kind of stuff. Then beyond that, you've got what I've kind of phrased as conversational utility. So this is something which will allow you to achieve something, booking a train ticket, booking a movie ticket, ordering a taxi, but you need to have a conversation in order to get there. It's very unlikely that someone will say to Alexa, book me an Uber for 8 people at 7 o'clock at X location. It's very unlikely that they're going to say all of that in one phrase. It's more often than not going to say, book me an Uber for 6 o'clock. Then there'll be a follow-up conversation, which is where do you want it from? Do you want it from where you are? Do you want it from somewhere else? So sometimes you need to have a conversation in order to establish enough information to be able to provide that utility, which is the Virgin Trains is another example. It needs to know where you're going to, where you're going from, how many people it's for, all that kind of stuff. And then on the other end, you've got kind of like a request and response. So one shot, I want to do something, give me an answer. What's the weather going to be tomorrow? It's going to rain. When's the last posting day before Christmas to post a package to Spain? It's going to be on the 20th of December. So this is the way that kind of we're thinking about it in terms of the kind of interactions that are being designed right now on voice assistants. So what does the future? Quite cool, that, isn't it? I like that. So what does the future look like? I think you can. There was an article again on VoiceBot, and there was another one I think on the Voice Tech podcast from Carl Robinson, and it was all about predictions for the future. And it was something like 36 predictions from 36 different voice experts. Out of 36 predictions from 36 voice experts, how many of them were the same? 0. Every single one was different, barring a couple that you could bracket in the same kind of way. So a few people mentioned the car, but the specifics of what they were talking about was slightly different. So either that tells you that no one has a clue what's going on, or it tells you actually that the scope and opportunity for this is so vast that anyone can imagine a different way of how it will all pan out. And in fact, all of those 36 examples could all pan out together in parallel. So I don't really want to make massively vast predictions of where things are going to end up and all that kind of stuff. Has anyone seen Years and Years? BBC? Yeah, I've only watched one episode, so I can't really speak too much about it, but it's really good. It's like set in the future. It's all about like what would happen if this stuff kind of panned out. It's really interesting. But anyway, so the first thing that I think will definitely happen, and this is what all of the kind of forecasts are predicting, is that smart speaker sales will continue to grow. So this is global smart speaker sales, except in China. So this is the kind of forecast over the next sort of like 5 years, 6 years. 291 million devices are forecast to be sold in the next 6 years. Could be more than that. It does seem to be on a decent trajectory. Just Amazon sold out in the UK last Black Friday. They literally ran out of devices on Amazon.com or .co.uk. So smart, and this is just smart speakers. This is not any other device that has a voice assistant. This is purely smart speakers. It's replacing radio essentially. There was an interesting study done in 2018. They did one study in 2009 in America, and they asked how many American households have a DAB digital radio, and it was about 21%. They did the same study again, and it was how many American households have a digital radio. That had gone down to 9%. And the amount of people who have a smart speaker, at that time it was like 19%, now it's like 25%. So more people in America have a smart speaker than have a digital radio. More people in the UK have a smart speaker than have a pet rabbit. How many people have a smart speaker? How many people have a pet rabbit? Point proven. You've got a pet rabbit?
Yeah, I do.
Wow, you're the only person who's actually pulled up one.
My daughter has, I don't know.
Yeah, well there you go, point proven though, isn't it? So more people have a smart speaker than a pet rabbit. So that's kind of one thing that's going to, I think, continue, is I think that we're going to continue to sell and adopt smart speakers. In terms of which smart speakers, the forecast is that Google will overtake Amazon in terms of their market share. Out of everyone who has a smart speaker, hands up who's got the Amazon Echo? Okay, hands down. Who's got the Google Assistant or Google Home? Okay. So the forecast is that this will flip in 5 years or so. And if you've seen some of the stuff that Google are doing, if you pay attention to the kind of industry and these companies in particular, Google are on fire. They are literally, some of their stuff they've announced at last I/O, you see some of it, it's absolutely unbelievable. They're kind of threading together everything they do and putting Google Assistant at the front of it all. So Gmail, calendars, YouTube, shopping, search, absolutely everything. They're threading the Assistant on top of it. So you're probably going to be interacting with Google Assistant on an Android phone, whether you like it or not, at some point in time. So the forecast is it will overtake Amazon. Has anyone seen this Gartner hype cycle before? It's really, really interesting because all of this has been very hypey at the moment, isn't it? And I'm always conscious that most of the time when I give a talk like this, I'm kind of like the voice fanboy. I'm just like, preaching to the world that voice is going to change everyone's life. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. I do genuinely believe that. That's the whole point of me being here. I do genuinely believe that. But I'm also well aware that we could just be over here somewhere at the moment. So for those who haven't seen this before, this is the Gartner hype cycle, and shout out to Charlie Cadbury, I say it now, who kind of introduced me to this. What it kind of says is that something happens, some technological innovation happens, right? And then it's hyped up to death. Every single article you read, every thing you come across is all covering this new innovative technology. AR and VR have kind of been through something similar. And voice is kind of going through this now. And what kind of happens is you end up at this point, which is the peak of inflated expectations. So everyone knows about it, everyone hears about it, everyone knows what it is. Most people know what Alexa is. It's been on South Park, for God's sake, you know what I mean? It's like, it is that kind of mass awareness. But what happens, there's Shakib Labidi and Hemel Jill, two user researchers, they've done a really interesting study around how people bring voice assistants into their home. And it kind of looks like this as well. When they first bring a voice assistant in, this, instead of hype or visibility, this is experimentation. So what happens is, when someone first gets a smart speaker, they'll experiment with it like crazy in the first couple of days. They'll ask it absolutely everything. And then they realise that everything they ask it can't quite do it all. Excuse me. So the expectation kind of dips a little bit, and the amount of experimentation they do on it dips as well. Until a friend comes round, or they have a gathering or a party, and then they experiment with it a bit more, so the experimentation goes up again. And slowly but surely, every time they experiment with it, they realise it can do something else, or they discover a new skill, or discover that skills exist in the first place. So over time, people gradually learn more about it, gradually use it more. And those, generally speaking, who have a smart speaker and use a smart speaker tend to transfer that usage of a voice assistant to their mobile device. So most people that have a smart speaker tend to use the assistant on their mobile device more than someone who doesn't have a smart speaker. So that's generally what happens. So we're kind of up here now. We're at the peak of inflated expectations. Everyone's buying the devices. Everyone's kind of like, experimenting with them. But then what will happen is that we'll realise that they don't quite live up to the expectations. They don't quite do what it says on the tin. And then down this, in the trough of disillusionment, this is where a lot of people will drop off and a lot of businesses will fail and a lot of people will go out of business and all that kind of stuff. And then what happens is people start actually solving some of the core problems that exist in the technology. Things like discoverability, things like design practices, things like data privacy and all that kind of stuff will all be tackled whenever this voice winter comes, which will, we think. And lastly, voice will inevitably be everywhere at some point in time. Might not be next week, might not be next year, might be in 5 years' time, but essentially because it's so accessible, it's so kind of frictionless, and it's so easy to implement with a little chip, a microphone and a speaker and an internet connection. In fact, with snips and stuff like that, you don't even need an internet connection. So I think we'll just see voice absolutely everywhere. We'll all be a lot more used to speaking to stuff and getting things done with our voice. Thank you.